Hong Ziquan is one of the bloodiest political religious figures in all of history. He's killed over 20 million people. Yet many of us in the West have no idea who this man is. Hong Ziquan was the youngest of 4 children in a poor Hakka family. The Hakkas were from North China, and they fled from North China to South China. And they were disliked because they were a different type of Chinese. I don't know. It's kind of like Africa. Everyone's, African, but they all hate each other. So at an early age, Hong showed great signs of intelligence. So much so that his whole village sponsored his studies so that he could take this test called the Confucianism Civil Service Exam, which is just a test that would allow him to become a government official so he could bring money and prosperity to his people. This test was the difference between being a farmer and a businessman. Shout out Mr. Business. So, Hong took this test for the first time in 1827 and failed. This test was basically the Olympics, It was like the rich put their kids into it. The whole idea was that if you are smart and you can prove that you're smart by taking this test, you become a part of the Chinese government. And then once you're a part of the Chinese government, you're in control of like making laws and regulating things. But the issue is nobody had access to education. So the rich would put their kids in and just completely like dominate the testing field because they had access to better teachers. So he takes the test several times and fails all of them. Each time he took the test, he had to travel to the capital in Canton, which happened to be the center of trade with the West. Hint, hint. So when he failed the test for the 3rd time in 1837, he suffered an emotional collapse. He was delirious for several days, screaming and banging on doors, and this is when, well, you'll see.
Hong's life would flash before his eyes. He would write poems, he would marry, he would slay demons, he would meet his real family, who he claimed was our boy, Jesus Christ. I see Jesus Christ, village man. He showed me how to kill some demons. He gave me a sword, I said good old Lord, that's a big old sword. He gave me a seal, we made a deal. I will kill all demons, I will kill everything this year. It would ruin so many lives.
When Hong recovered, his whole demeanor changed. According to his family, he was just morally righteous, and he seemed to be more uptight.
Nobody believes Hong. They all say he's crazy. Outcasted for a little bit. So 6 years passed, and his cousin Lee comes over and points at a book on Hong's bookshelf. This book is called Good Words to Exhorting the Age.
The book was written by a man named Liang Fa, China's first Christian missionary. Hong recalled getting the book during his visit to Canton in 1837, right before he had his visions. So this book explained the basic elements of Christianity. Apparently Hong read the book but had forgotten about it. So once Lee brought it to his attention, Hong reread the book. And after 6 years of wondering about his visions, he had his answer. He realized that during this episode, he had been transported to heaven. The old man he had spoken to was God, his father, and the middle-aged man was his older brother, Jesus Christ. While reading parts of the book written by Liang Fa, a lot of the pronouns were translated in first person. I, me, you, as if the book had been written for Hong. Hong then baptized himself, prayed to God, and declared himself a Christian. So after this little moment, Hong then decides to tell his friends and family about his findings. And this is when he begins to spread his message. One of Hong's most important specimens was his schoolmate Fang. So Hong is a school teacher because he was so smart. He was the village teacher. So he's at his teaching job with Fang, and then he starts burning Confucianism text, which is the equivalent of like a preacher burning the Bible. You just don't do that. His justification was these books were teaching things that he didn't agree with, and they were wrong. So they needed to be terminated. So Hong gets fired and just decides to go preaching with his friend Fang. Their trip was to a neighboring Gongzai province. They preached for 3 years. While Hong was traveling, him and Fang went their separate ways. Fang stayed in Guangzhou and built a group called the God Worshipping Society, a group dedicated to Hong's teachings. So Hong's been preaching for 3 years at this point and comes across a man named Issachar Jacob Roberts. Hong was excited because most Christian teachings at the time were via books. You know, they were smuggled in books, so they didn't have missionaries. So Hong was even more excited to hear that Issachar Jacob Reverend Roberts would personally train Hong about the teachings of Christianity. This did not last. Reverend Roberts came to the conclusion that Hong should be formally baptized by the church. So the committee responsible for baptism said they would baptize Hong, they just wouldn't give him any form of employment. Hong, being a poor, simple preacher, asked Reverend Roberts for some money. Roberts then felt disappointed in Hong, and after 2 months, they went their separate ways. So Hong left Roberts and joined his friend Fang at a place called Thistle Mountain. When Hong arrived at Thistle Mountain, he was delighted, exuberated to find Fang somehow convinced 3,000 people to join this movement, and these were the God worshippers. These people immediately accepted Hong as their new leader. Hong even gave them his own version of the Christian Bible, and they gladly accepted it. Thistle Mountain was in the mountains and now served as the God worshippers' head base. So to join the God worshipping society, you had to do a ritual. Men and women would sit across from each other separately in a hall. Their eyes would be closed while someone was singing a song praising God. The recruited would then sit in front of a table with 2 lamps, 3 cups of tea, and a list of all of their sins. The God worshippers believed that sins came from disobeying the 10 Commandments. So the recruits would then take their list and burn all of their sins. And then they would write ways that they could not do those sins again. Hong would then say God needs to be worshipped, or else the country will fall and become weak and divided. Hong would then say that he would show the recruits the proper path. The recruits would then be asked if they're going to commit evil acts or worship demons. The recruits would then kneel down and the God worshippers would pour the tea over their heads. They would then say, "You are now purified of all sin." All of the recruits' money would then be stored in one giant vault for everybody to share on Thistle Mountain. So this, to me personally, is very interesting. Now, some of you may be thinking, how did this nobody, this simple school teacher, cause the deaths of 20 million people? How did 20 million people even get involved? And my response is this: Hong was able to play with these people's minds. A good metaphor would be this: if you were to kidnap somebody and put them in a cage, right, they would probably be really uncomfortable and freak out. But if you somehow convince that person that they need to be in that cage, that this cage is the only way for them to be safe, they'll probably thank you. They probably won't see you as someone who's actually taking advantage of them and keeping them in a cage. You would probably thank them and be grateful to even have the opportunity to be in the cage for your own safety. And this sounds ridiculous, right? And that's because it is. But this happens all the time. This is how governments are formed. And I guess another thing that I should probably mention is that this isn't just Hong. This is a group effort. Hong wasn't the only one preaching. And spoiler alert, Hong was not the only one claiming to be related to God. And also, most of the people they target are vulnerable. At first, a lot of these people were other rejects. They were also people who failed their civil service exam. And a lot of them were Hakka. And the Hakkas were targeted violently by the government. Speaking of the government, everybody hated the Qing dynasty. So what's so fascinating to me is that Hong was able to appeal to people's emotions and control what they think. And once you control what people think, you control their bodies, diets, money, what they wear, how they talk, what they should fight for. Anyways, if I ever unalive myself, no I didn't, that was probably the Qing dynasty and they're out to get me. And another thing I should mention is that people in today's generation tend to think that our ancestors were dumb. And to be honest, that's just not the case. We are very much children of the scientific revolution. Science has this thing called arrogance. And it's really common for our generation to look down on people in the past and be like, why were they stupid? There's no way they could fall for this. But I'm just saying, there are people who have political leaders on the same sticker as Jesus Christ. So it's not so simple as, oh, they were just dumb in the past and they didn't know that they were being taken advantage of. Because everything that happened to these people is nothing new. And it's not old either. So, back to the story. The God worshippers continue to do what every other religion does. At the time, Thistle Mountain was basically a village. So what the God worshippers did was they started to attack bandits in the surrounding area. Some of these bandits were actually bandits who pillaged villages, but most of them were just people with different culture/religious views. People who didn't conform, so they were outcasted and targeted. So as the God worshippers clear the area of bandits, they hear a tale of a very famous demon by the name of Kan Wang Ye. So the tale goes like this. When Kan Wang Ye was alive, he was really into geomancy, which is basically wizard, like opium wizard, cool stuff. It's like you get a stick and you make symbols in the dirt so that you can learn some like supernatural knowledge. So one day, Kan Wang Ye, we're just gonna call him Ken because I'm lazy and I Americanize everything. I'm American. So one day, Ken is talking to a magician, and the magician tells him that a bloody burial would be followed by a great prosperity. So Ken immediately goes home, kills his mom, and then buries her. Where he's doing some magic dirt symbol geomancy stuff. So Ken then gets outcasted and died. But once he died, he was worshipped as a demon. So, and he even got his own temple. So, he did, like... And most temples have people that maintain them. So these people who maintained Ken's temple would beat on a gong to keep Ken's evil spirit away. And if anyone spoke ill of Ken, they would instantly throw up and have violent diarrhea. Holy shit. So Hong hears this tale and basically says, these are the demons I used to kill in heaven, and that these things need to be eradicated, blah blah. He's so righteous. He then takes the God worshippers and destroys this temple. And did too. One day, as the locals are talking about the perpetrators, a local boy suddenly gets possessed. He gets possessed by the demon Ken, and he says,
"The destroyers of idols are sincere men. You are not able to hurt them."
So all of this helped Hong's image, and it boosted the popularity of the god worshippers. But this came at a cost. The Qing dynasty were Manchus, and the Manchus hated the Hakkas. They're both Chinese, but they're just from different parts of China. So I guess that's enough reason to hate each other. I don't know. So, as the god worshippers are destroying yet another temple, a few of them get caught, and they get thrown in jail. And Hong was able to bribe some of them out, but the rest were killed by the Manchus, aka the Qing dynasty. So Hong destroys a couple more temples and religious shrines surrounding Thistle Mountain, and then Hong's father dies. At the age of 73, Hong's father died, and Hong mourned his father deeply. So much so that he allowed his hair and beard to grow out. And this is interesting, because at the time, it was customary for Hong's fellow countrymen to wear their hair short. They had to shave their heads. If they didn't, it resulted in execution. It was a sign of submission to their conquerors. Anyone who didn't comply was automatically executed for treason. However, Hong had no plans for shaving his hair. So, the god worshippers grew all of their hair out. And this was purely in defiance of the Qing dynasty. It was so noticeable that the Qing dynasty even started calling them the long-haired ghosts. Hong stayed home for nearly a year. He was mourning his father, and while he was at home, he comes up with the rules for the god worshippers. Hong gets 5 wooden rods, and on each one writes a rule. This is what they said.
I'm in a position of power, and there's a certain group I don't like. So I think that I'll target them, and I think that I'll make them suffer.
People are really annoying me, and they're different. So I think they need to conform. That's what they need to do. So I'm going to enforce my rules on them. My own personal rhetoric, my own personal beliefs, because why wouldn't I? They're sick. They need guidance, right?
So I think I'll just use my power
And
to belittle them.
I think I'll do that. So, yeah. Hong's movement grew stronger. It grew larger. A large number of Hakkas were fleeing attacks from some neighboring tribes in Guangxi. The movement was now 10,000 strong, and by 1849, they were now raiding villages, temples, and smashing shrines. This is when they start to force people to join their movement. Economic and political conditions in China only worsened. The governor of Guangxi did absolutely nothing to stop the neighboring hill tribes attacking the locals. And these hill tribes were only raiding because of a bad harvest. China was collapsing. A lot of the population was hooked to opium. Therefore, nobody was working. They were starving. And on top of this, there was a bad harvest because of the weather. So, people had to resort to pillaging. Or, you could join the god worshippers. The two groups that joined the god worshippers were either Hakkas, who were joining because there was a civil war breaking out between the Hakkas and the Manchu, which were basically people who made up the Qing dynasty. The Hakkas also joined because they were being attacked by these neighboring hill tribes. And then the second group that would join the god worshippers were non-Hakka. And these people joined because they were angry. They were mad at the Qing dynasty. They hated the corrupt upper class. They felt like they failed them. But what's important about both groups is that they were both just trying to survive. The Qing dynasty was starting to notice how big the god worshippers were getting. They were fed up with the destruction of their temples and shrines, and Hong started to notice this. So Hong told the god worshippers to raid the nearby markets for supplies. One of the god worshippers owned a foundry, which is just an ancient metal making factory. So Hong told the god worshippers to use this foundry and make weapons. Hong and the god worshippers then leave Thistle Mountain. The new emperor at the time was a 19-year-old named Xingfeng. He also resided in Guangxi. So Hong and his troops go to Guangxi. So as we mentioned earlier, at this time, China is suffering from rebellions. They're like pimples, they just keep popping up. So Hong isn't really the biggest threat to the Qing dynasty right now, because there's another group called the Triads, aka the Red Turbans. So the Red Turbans wore red turbans as a sign of membership, and they were ruled by 8 chiefs. And these guys actually wanted to join the god worshippers at one point. They even asked to learn the god worshippers' ways. Unfortunately, one of the Triads ends up killing a god worshipper over a dispute because the Triad wanted to know where the god worshippers store all their money, and the god worshippers said, screw you. So the Triads join up with the Qing dynasty. A major battle took place from December 1850 to January 1851. The battle took place at a town called Jintan. The god worshippers were victorious. And on January 11th, 1851, his 38th birthday,
Formally declared the establishment of the heavenly kingdom of peace, with himself as the heavenly king. And this is when things get really bloody, really fast. A lot of people start to die. All because he's king. All because he was wanting power. He was just a greedy little fool. Do I really have to keep spelling it out?
Hong now has amassed 20,000 followers. He's captured Guangzhou and he sets it up into sections. Each section is ruled by one of Hong's generals, and people like his old friend Feng rule their own districts with an iron fist. I mentioned this earlier, but a lot of the god worshippers were joining either by force or for survival. So some of them probably didn't believe Hong's teachings. So a lot of the newer members came from captured cities. And anytime there was a battle, these newer members were surrounded by the older members. And whenever they were on a battlefield, it always looked like this. You'd have the older members surrounding all of the newer members because a lot of the newer members would flee the battlefield. They didn't care about this battle, they were joining to survive. So this is why the older members were always on the outside. Because when these newer members tried to flee, the older members would execute the ones fleeing. Hong's troops are now 10 million strong, blah blah blah, who cares? Let's talk about the god worshippers and what their lives looked like. So the god worshippers believed that the Old Testament was the only valid source of the Bible. They believed that God was not a friend of mankind, but that God had to be worshipped and praised. They believe that they have sinned against a great God, and the goal is to be forgiven for their sins. So if you obeyed your superiors or if you died in battle, you were guaranteed to go to heaven. And if you tried to flee during battle or you disobeyed your superiors, then you were an enemy of Hong and you were destined for hell. Wine, tobacco, opium, and even flirting all resulted in death. The god worshippers would also split into 25 families, and each family would have to cultivate a certain amount of rice depending on each of the members' age and size and all of that. These 25 families had their own church, and they each had their own vault to store the extra rice and money for that specific compound. Now at this point, some of you are probably thinking, wow, this is a cult. And yeah, it is, but they don't do anything different from what we do today. All of our money gets taken and stored in one big place. We all typically live in an area with multiple families. Drugs are illegal. Adultery is usually shameful. And 55% of the population go to a building and pray for an hour or two, blah, blah, blah. My point is that we are no better than them. And if you really want to get cynical, we are probably worse than them. The way they live their life sounds ridiculous and cultish to us, but that's because they're ancient. They're different than us. There's no way I could ever fall for that, right? Here's how this story ends. Hong gets punked by the Qing Dynasty. Qing Dynasty reaches out to Western civilizations and they all punk Hong. 10 to 20 million people died, all because one man was able to convince them that he was special. We don't know how Hong died, but most historians say it was accidental. Maybe he was assassinated. It doesn't matter. Hong's story isn't new, and I still believe that he exists. He's still out there. Doesn't matter if I talked about Hitler, Hong, Stalin, or any other powerful person. They are all still Hong. Even the Qing Dynasty are Hong. This video isn't supposed to tell you what to think, because honestly, I don't care what you think. The point is for you to just think. Think about what you believe in. Think about what makes you, you. Think about why you act how you act. Just think, and you'll all come to your own answers.
He never died. He just recycled.